Instead of one perfect recommendation algorithm that gives you exactly what you want, I would like to see different kinds of recommendation algorithms for me.
The following is a conversation with Jaron Harambam and Laurens van de Bogaert, two researchers in the field of human-AI interactions that published a paper on the topic of news recommender personae. News recommender personae is a concept that addresses the ethical and societal concerns surrounding algorithmic recommender systems in the field of journalism. With the goal to increase reader satisfaction with news products, Jaron and Laurens have identified three distinct recommender systems: the expert, the challenger, and the unwinder, which correspond to the most prominent reading motivations of news consumers. Join us as we explore this innovative solution for ensuring transparency, diversity, and agency in news media. Guys, thanks for being here. I think it's a great pleasure, and thanks for hosting this, Jaron. Today is quite an exceptional occasion, I would say. We decided to record this podcast because you guys actually are talking about a very compelling topic. And by the way, congrats for being published, Laurens, Jaron. I think it's great. I'm personally very enthusiastic about the topic of today, so maybe I'll give the word to you. You can quickly introduce yourself and tell us more a little bit about this topic that you investigate in news recommender personae and why it's relevant today and so on. So, Jaron?
All right, so my name is Jaron Harambam. I'm an interdisciplinary sociologist working in media and tech environments. And this is an offspring of a research project that we did together in the last 2 years. So that's just basically it. I work at the University of Amsterdam now. So up to you, Laurens.
Yeah, I'm Laurens, and I've been doing user research mainly for the last 4 years now. First at KU Leuven, and now I'm at the University of Brussels. Currently working on a completely different topic, but indeed, Jaron said this is a nice offspring of a joint research project that we did, and that credits due where they are due, comes from an original idea from Jaron.
Okay, interesting. And how did you got, let's say, interested in the topic of news, specifically about personalized recommendations, right? Which is the topic a little bit of today, but. How did you get to investigate this specific topic?
So very practically, the research project that we were working on together was funded by the Dutch SIDN funds, and it actually was a proposal after a conceptual paper that I wrote a few years ago. Okay. So working in the information ecosystem, I always found it very interesting that now we have an abundance of information, and how do you make sense of it? How do you get the information that you need that is relevant to you? So here comes in the recommender systems, and I think they're like a very smart way of making relevant selections, but they've also been very tainted in public discourse. People spoke very easily about being trapped in filter bubbles and only getting to see what you already know, what you already have seen before. While I believe the technology is very powerful and it actually has a lot of promise. But there's many sort of complicated societal and ethical aspects to these recommender systems. But the discussion around recommender systems are filter bubble creators is too narrow. So that was sort of the initial outset of the research program. Then of course, I think what I always found very annoying is that then there's these filtering algorithms, recommender systems by social media or by news aggregators, but they do it in a way that is completely intransparent to me. I don't know what kind of selections they make for me, on what criteria, and I have no control over it. Like on a Monday night, I want to have a different kind of selection of the news than on a Saturday afternoon. Or if I want to search for something that is relevant to my research topic or my hobbies or something, maybe I would like to be in a filter bubble, actually, that is relevant, it's helpful. I need to get all my information about ice skating or something, then you want to have more and more of the same.
Do you ice skate?
Not anymore.
It is something that we also see because indeed Twipe does provide a personalization system, and what we see indeed is that there is a value to this recommender systems, right? It's really in a time where time is actually finite and most people don't have time, the ability to surface the content that people are interested in, it's actually quite valuable in the end, right? But I also line that there is a lack of transparency. Maybe because I imagine you researched the topic, can you expand on what is being currently done by maybe social media? What are the classical ways that personalized systems and personalized recommenders are working? Are there like specific approaches, standard approaches that you observe in the industry?
I think that recommender systems can be found in almost any domain now. You have them when you watch Netflix, you have them when you're listening to Spotify, and they can also be found in the news context. But where I think news is filtered or can be filtered and personalized in many different ways, and that's also how it's being done from what we can see. But the question indeed is, and that's how we got to the research, is how transparent is it, first of all? How can consumers be given a bit more agency in the way that their content is filtered, and be given some transparency in the fact that it is filtered in the first place, which is also a very important one. Not everyone is very aware of the fact that they are receiving curated, catered sets of content.
Okay. Yeah. And I think what's interesting is before you had the chronological feed, and when sort of the personalized feeds came in, and then it became very intransparent about how is it organized, your feed, how is your selection organized. But you see some different companies are doing much better in terms of explaining as well why you get these contents. And I think also a nice example perhaps is maybe Spotify, where also at the end of the year you get sort of feedback on what you've listened to, so you can also empower yourself and learn from what kind of person am I actually, and what kind of newsreader am I? Do I need to shift my focus, or wow, I never knew I was so much into heavy metal actually, or these are just random examples, but I think giving something back from the data collection that is so necessary for these recommender systems to the user in terms of dashboards of what you've been consuming to help you understand more about yourself. Okay. Is a nice added value that, for example, Spotify does. But so there's many different ways where I think you can give the user more not only more control, but also more sort of tools to reach the goals that people have. And that's, I think, to make these recommender systems not just work for the content providers, but also for the users, and have a win-win situation is for me the goal of such systems.
So I understand from reading your paper, of course, that you came up with a proposed solution, right? This concept of news recommender Personae. So how do you see that? So first of all, what it is, maybe for people that are at home listening, what is the concept of news recommender Personae, and how do you think it tackles the issue of transparency that you just pointed out?
Yeah. So let's see where to start. I think the recommender personae are, so what for me was important, that you actually need different kind of recommendation algorithms, right? Sometimes you want one that gives you a very specialized filter bubble-like algorithm that will give you more of the similar sort of information.
Based on what you read,
exactly.
So what other people are reading.
Yeah, so converging algorithm. And at other times you want to diverge, you want to open up your horizons, you want to explore different fields of interest, etc. Sometimes you just want to, relax and have easy content. So the idea was more that you have these feeds, but there's only one kind of feed, and that's limiting. And I think why don't you have actually multiple kinds of feeds for different moments or moods or interests? So there it started, that I thought actually instead of one perfect recommendation algorithm that gives you exactly what you want, I thought I'm not a stable interest person or something. I have different interests depending on the context, depending on my mood. So you would like to see, I would like to see different kinds of recommendation algorithms for me.
Okay.
So that was the starting point. But then I saw some sort of experiments where people could tweak these algorithms. More of this or less of that, more of this, more of that. And then you get all these sliders. And then I thought, okay, that's on the one hand gives you a lot of control.
But people are lazy, aren't they?
Of course, it's just like the cookie settings or the privacy settings. Nobody is ever using any of these. So I thought you need a sort of a very intuitive, one-click solution. So then I thought, how can you still retain sort of the complexity of these different types of algorithms, but make it intuitive? And that's by putting a human face to it, which is also the title of our paper. So very much by anthropomorphizing the algorithm, people get a very quick and intuitive understanding of what the algorithm does, what kind of recommendations you're getting from that persona.
Okay.
So that was like a way to make it intuitive, easy to use, and also explainable. Because by using it, like for example, sort of the idea was that you have, for example, the expert that gives you very specialized information. So you understand that this recommender algorithm is very much focusing on specific, like the same sort of stuff. If you want the explorer, that's the one who opens up your horizon. So by picking sort of these personae that personify, typify the recommendation algorithm, I think that was sort of the conceptual idea of these recommender personae.
So the idea indeed is because they have a human face, sort of this persona, people will be able to relate more, and so they will be, first of all, getting the advantage of using multiple algorithms, right? Or choosing the algorithm that they actually want to use in that very moment, so that really suits their needs. So let's say you're on vacation, you don't want to do some heavy reading, you just want to read something lighter in the evening on the sofa, you want to relax. It's a different moment of consumption rather than in the morning before going to work. Maybe you're a politician, you have to be up to speed with the moments of the day, right?
Exactly, it's like Jaron says, people are not stable entities. At one point in time and place, you are looking for different reading or different kinds of content. So yeah, and I think what you say with relating to the personae, the angle that we took was that we created personae with whom you do not necessarily identify or relate to in a one-on-one sense, but you have a persona or a set of personae that you understand. You need to understand what kind of selection of news they will make for you, but you don't necessarily need to relate to them one-on-one, because there are other platforms that also have personae that offer selections of content, and there the idea is indeed that when you are a businessman, you want to be provided the news by another businessman, and that's more the indication, or the angle there is more having a relation to it. For us, the idea was more your original idea, Aaron, that you just understand without having to identify with the persona what kind of selection that persona will make for you. Exactly.
So maybe can you expand a little bit more, how did you arrive, because I understand from the paper that indeed there were a number of personas that you explored. Can you explain a little bit more, how did you arrive to identify a number of them? So how did you start it in the first place, and how then you narrow it down to the set of personas that you're actually proposing in your paper?
Yeah, so I think I will. I started off with this idea from sort of theoretical and normative ideas about what the news should do and what kind of different news people would like to have. So this was purely conceptual, based on theory and literature and my own ideas. So I came up with like the expert, the explorer, the moral vacationer, like these sort of stuff. But they were not based on people's news readers, people's interests or needs or etc. So the research grant that I got was to investigate what kind of news needs or interests or preferences people have, and based on these develop recommender personae that are empirically grounded and desired by people. So this is where Lawrence came in, that we started to do this empirical research with people to actually see what kind of news habits do they have. And I think you can explain a bit more about the concrete research that we did.
So coming from a background of doing user research, indeed, Jaron came to me at that point to see how can we empirically ground this idea of recommender personae in an actual empirical data. So what we did is, or the idea was to start from the reading motivations that people have. So there is literature on why people read the news. There's multiple reasons you can read the news. We've touched on that shortly already. So what we first did was actually we started from gathering reading motivations from people. More specifically, we did that by having people, participants in the study, keep a diary where they were asked to keep track of the news articles that they read, and for one article each day during 1 week they were asked to reflect a little bit on that article and answer some questions on that article, like why did I read this article, what was I looking for, did this article meet my needs. And also, like from this data, we distilled some core reading motivations, and that was actually the starting point from where we went. Because that brings back, or that comes back to the essence of why do people consume news. It's the motivation they have to read the news, and that was the most logical starting point for the personae as well, in the end, to be based on. So after capturing these reading motivations, during a workshop we tried to identify together with these participants what the factors are that concommit with these reading motivations. So when your reading motivation, for example, is to really dive into a set of news or a piece of content, you want lengthy articles that can have some complex language in them, for example. You don't want the light reading and a lot of flashy GIFs in there. You just want substantiated, in-depth reading. So starting from the reading motivations, we looked to the features that articles should have indeed, and linked them to those reading motivations, doing clustering exercises. And those reading motivations with the article features related to them or connected to them were actually the starting point for the eventual personae design.
Was there any specific reading motivation that stood out as being like the one that people go to the news most often for, or?
Yeah, it's for me there was one that stood out, and that was the one that was emphasized most often. A lot of people said that it was important for them to be shown news that widened their horizon or showed them things outside of their regular thinking. Whereas I'm not sure in practice it might be possible that people actually do not go to these articles automatically. You probably more easily go to the things that you know or want to read about or relate to. Yeah. But actually everyone said, upon reflecting on it, that it is important for them to also read things that are out of their comfort zone and knowledge zone. So that was the one for me that stood out the most. Like, of course, there was also just being brought up to date on what was new for the last, what happened the last couple of hours. When you wake up, what happened this night in the rest of the world.
That's a different need in a different moment, right?
That's a different need in a different moment. There's also the need of, that was one of the core reading motivations also, the one that eventually turned into the unwinder persona, was just having some easy reading, not too heavy. But then the one that showed things out of people's comfort zones and enticed them and pulled them out of what they were used to reading, that was the one that for me
and I think I can even expand it a bit further, because there were a few of the participants in these co-design workshops that you sort of, I think, undersell it, because the research project is very much designing together with people these new technologies, and I think you have a lot of experience, and also the institute that you worked at with doing such workshops. But there were a few people who said, I want to also be annoyed or agitated by the perspective or the articles, so to get angry about it. And that was sort of a reading motivation that I didn't think of before. Yeah. So there also we developed the recommended personae of the agitator, the one that goes under your skin and annoys you. The devil's advocate. Oh yeah, that is what the one
advocate,
it became in the end.
So yeah, people do seem to be, I mean, especially because the people that were recruited for the study, the people that were involved, were all reading the news on a regular basis. And obviously you partake in these kinds of workshops when you have the tendency to reflect on your news reading behavior at least a little bit, I think. So in that sense, people were already, also through the diaries that they kept, reflecting on the articles that they read throughout 1 week, they were primed to be reflective a little bit more maybe than an average reading or news consumer. But people were in general very aware of the role that news plays and their relation to it, and the fact that there's very different types of news reading and very different types of content that answer to the
I think
news reading
at Twipe,
needs.
because we built products, right, for newspapers, different kind of products, indeed we recognize the same, is that the consumption that you see in the morning, right, if you go see charts, it will be a morning peak, and that's a clear moments of consumption, right? So, and there you will see that the formats that would work the most indeed are the morning briefing, update me, like this notion, also one of the needs that you express being I need to get the news of the day fast, I need to get updated, I need information for my day-to-day life. But indeed then we have successful cases of publishers like West France. They came up with a digital-only edition there that is in the evening only, right? So it's published at 6 p.m. and it's instead a lot of light reading. It's the news of the day but repackaged in a lighter format. And actually in this sort of finite product, they have games, puzzles, so they really make it a product to unwind. So it's a completely different use needs. I think it's important for people to recognize this when designing recommender systems, that it's not one size fits all, right?
Yeah, exactly. People
I
are
think
not
that's
against stable entities. There's different needs and different times.
And maybe building on that, like I understand that of course you've done this research, you've done this workshop, so you work on a number of these personas. How was the converging process? So how did you nail it down to what I would call essential needs probably, or the most important ones that you propose in the paper?
Yeah, so I think in the end, after this workshop, we had like 8 or 9 different recommender personae. That maybe was a bit too much, right? Like, it's nice to
too
have
much choice, right?
Too many choices to make. Which persona would I like to be guided by this time was a bit too much, perhaps. So we started having also the participants, new line of participants of people to actually think about which are the ones, you can actually I think explain better, but they were having news articles to read and assign them to the different recommender personae that they thought it would be recommended by.
Maybe to very shortly summarize what came out of the workshop first was actually out of the diaries were 4 core reading motivations people have. We just touched upon them, and for each of those 4 key motivations we developed 2 personas at first. That's how we came to 8 original personae. And then indeed, like Jaron said, we had a set of evaluation interviews with a new line of participants that were first of all explained the concept of algorithmic or anthropomorphized recommender systems, and then more in depth the 8 personae that we had developed. And then what we did is we showed them some news reading, some news articles, and then they were asked, after having been introduced to all these personae, which persona related to each of these articles best for them and why. And these were interviews, so we gained a lot of qualitative data, insights, reasonings behind it.
How were linking
how they were linking them, why they were linking them, and at the end of these interviews, we just had a general assessment of the personae. In general, people were very excited about the idea of it. They liked the fact that they would be guided by a persona that is easy to recognize, easy to relate to. But 8 indeed was too much. When you go to a news website, you just want to start reading. You don't want to first have to read about 8 personae, but 3 is clear. And so we brought down the 8 original personae to 3 core personae: the unwinder, the expert, and the challenger. Challenger being the one that gives you news that you are not used to from different political angles, maybe also. The expert that gives you more in-depth reading, and then the unwinder that gives you just unwinding news. So we diverge them or distill them into 3 personae based on the feedback that people gave during these evaluation interviews.
And maybe can you expand a little bit more, because before you mentioned that for each reading motivation you looked into features of articles that should be into that reading motivation, or at least like the reading persona, right? So for example, I remember you said before about in-depth, the need of getting in-depth news. You would expect the article to be lengthy, to have infographics, if I remember correctly from the paper. So can you briefly map for each one of the 3 personas that you have, which features would be the most important to consider?
Yeah, well, I think Lawrence already explained it, right? So we have the expert that gives you more in-depth, contextual, the rich, long reads, more or less.
Yeah.
And then we have the challenger that is actually giving you news from different perspectives or topics that you haven't read before. So, and the unwinder is then light and easy. It can have more visuals. It can have like these more playful stuff. But I think what is important also to recognize is that it's not only these recommender, they are still personalized, right? So it's not just selections based on the contents that you get different kinds of news article on like the features of an article, but that's coupled with a personalized section.
Okay.
Yeah, and to get back to, I mean, I don't know by heart. I would encourage people to go have a look at the paper to look at the exact factors related to to link it to the core reading motivations. But to sum up just a few from the top of my head, for example, for the expert, so the in-depth reading, people expected articles to be long. They didn't mind difficult jargon, difficult wording, longer sentences. Whereas for the unwinder, the easier reading news, people expected more visual material, visuals, didactic material, maybe a short video, GIF maybe, even if we're going into very...
Depending also on the kind of newspapers.
Also, of course, yeah. And then for the challenger, people described factors or article features such as coming from different political angles.
So in general, you see that people wouldn't mind, even in the case of the challenger, right? So like opinionated pieces, for example, right? So it's still a need to
absolutely, and a lot of people, I think, are very well aware of the dangers, political dangers of being entrapped in sort of an ideological filter bubble or echo chamber. So not everybody, of course, but a lot of people want to understand also their opponents or their political adversaries. So in that way, this gives you easy ways to get confronted with different perspectives. If you want to understand like the complex problems we face in society nowadays, it's all about different positions that people try to grasp that are not their own. So these are clear motivations, and going against the assumption of a lot of filtering algorithms that people only want to get what they already know. In a lot of situations, it's exactly what you don't know that you want to know.
It's very interesting. I also see this, and I completely align that's myself, it's data point of 1, of course, but I also look for opinions that are outside of what I currently believe, because I want to know, right? So what other people I think is, so that you can actually create. I mean, in the end, if you really think about it, news and in general, the service of news, right, should also provide you what the others are thinking, because that's the base of democracy, right? The confrontation. So I think it's very valuable what you're saying. That and I'm happy to see that it's substantiated in research, that people actually look for others' opinion and actually being fence on one side, right? So it's not always both. If we're talking about recommender system or just as a general content strategy, is not the right thing to just fossilize yourself in one camp, right?
No.
Yeah, to look back to the reason behind this work or the idea behind the recommender persona, I think that they help people recognize the fact that they might be reading the same things, or they might be, well, filter bubbles is a contested term, but you at least sensitize people to the fact that the angle through which they read the news, or the curation of their newsfeed, can come from different motivations, or can be different. So just sensitizing people to this already, I think, is valuable in itself. Whether or not they then choose to have the challenger curate their newsfeed, it's the fact that they realize and are made aware of the fact that that these newsfeeds can be curated is what's valuable about it.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. So it's like also, maybe that wasn't clear before, but it's like the idea is that you land on a news page and then you get like to pick from these different personae, and then you enter the website or the personalized selections. So there's also a way, if you just want to get so a lot of the journalists that we speak are very afraid that the whole editorial perspective of the newspaper gets lost by these new technological developments, right? So I think also here you can insert in these algorithms the different kinds of editorial decisions that are being made day by day, that like you can include the 3 top articles that the editors think everybody should read. So there's all kinds of ways where you can tweak the personalized part of these algorithms with the more sort of content or editorial decisions as well.
Yeah, I think in our job at Twipe, we see the same. We have this product and we work that does personalized recommendation. And indeed, when we work together with publishers, what we see is that what actually works the best is when you can combine the data from the recommender system, so indeed data-driven or data-informed, to better say, approach that comes from this algorithmic systems with the knowledge of editors. So what we try to do is always to involve the editorial staff in the process, involve the journalists, because indeed there are sometimes those 3 top articles that you really want everybody to read, and that's part of the editorial process. I think where we see indeed the best results is when you're able to combine these 2 approaches. I think it's
absolutely, and you see that in the broader context, right? There's a lot of sort of moral panic about AI overtaking humans, and what you see is that the AI and the machine learning, etc., is not exchanging human expertise. It works best if they come together. So we need this technology, and the technology needs us as well. So that's also, I think, an important sort of narrative to convey, especially to the non-tech people, who are often, especially in journalism, they are afraid their jobs are being lost to technology, but they have valuable expertise, and it's like, I think, for a company like Twipe, fascinating to bring these kinds of expertise together.
Indeed.
And also not unimportant maybe is that from the research also came out that people also had this concern during these evaluation interviews. For example, people said like, but maybe what if I don't want any curation at all? And that's actually because there was a 4th persona, a paper boy, who would just bring the newsfeed as it was. But we left it out because that's basically reading the news website as you would read it without any recommender system. So that's why also in the paper we say that there should always be the option just for people to say, I don't want any curated version now. So you give them the option of the personae, but you also leave them the option to just have the editorial selection of the news. That came out of the research as well. So indeed, I think it's a very important thing to remark.
So maybe since we already started going into this in bits and pieces, did you, besides the paper, made let's say a leap and started thinking of how this can be implemented as a product? Did you have such conversations? Are you looking for partners? Maybe this
that's what you guys are for.
No, I think so. When I started with the idea, it was already, I think, 4 years ago, and the research was 2 years ago. And during my first research project, I worked with DPG Media here in Amsterdam, there was a whole AI team, more or less, and I was joining them for research purposes. And we had a lot of these workshops as well, where they're thinking about strategy, etc. And so everybody's always very excited about this idea, but it's also something of the future, I think, because there's still so much low-hanging fruit for news organizations to get their recommender systems working. Right now, with our idea, you need 3 or 4 recommender systems, more or less. Yeah. And also the sort of specifics of it, that you need sort of ideological diversity and different viewpoints, and how these articles are annotated in their content management system is already
a challenge.
Yeah. So I think sort of this idea is a few years ahead of its time. That I see these news companies first trying to establish a well-working recommender system, and then later only it makes sense to actually give these to have these special parts. And you see also the relevance. I think it's bigger for larger news corporations that have different journals or news aggregators, because then you have a bigger variety of content as well. So it also makes more sense from that perspective. So I think for now, we didn't develop the technical tool. It's a conceptual tool, and it would be very interesting to see how that actually looks like in practice, and how people use it in their everyday life. Yeah.
Did you already have an idea of how this could be implemented? Like, what would be the steps, or?
Yeah, well, I don't have a technical background. I don't have a very thorough knowledge of AI or AI modeling, for example. So I think that would be, this work would needs to be connected to the technical part. Next steps would be looking at the feasibility of it technically, indeed. But for that, the research project that we're talking about was rounded up cleanly, and so there's no concrete next steps towards that, not on our side at least. But we hope that the paper finds its way to a big audience, and that people pick up on the idea, and then maybe from a more technical angle it's looked at, and its feasibility is discerned.
So in the research project before, we worked also with a data scientist and with a computer scientist, and we started to formalize these different algorithms based on these conceptual qualities. So there's and that's quite easy, I think. You can formalize these algorithms in different ways. I think the big challenge is to get so you need multiple of these pipelines. You need the contents really qualitatively annotated in a very complex way. So there is just a big investment, I think, to get it running. But you see, our goal of this paper was mostly to stimulate a new generation of AI specialists to think about, different possibilities of these recommender possibilities.
Just don't look for perfection for the algorithm, one that fits all. Just look at a different approach, recognize, right, so that people have different needs, as we said before, throughout the day, throughout their lifetimes, actually. Because as you said, it's very context dependent. We evolve as people, and our needs change. And then from there realize that it's not one algorithm for everybody. It's much more look for different algorithms, and this is a suggestion of how you could do it, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, guys, very interesting to talk to you. I think it's a very great idea that you had, and I really hope as well that people, maybe by looking at this or reading a blog about it or reading your paper, which I highly recommend, by the way, can really get inspired and hopefully to see it, something that I actually would like to see and use.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe before we close off, because I would like to return the question then, what did you like about this idea? Why did it resonate with you?
Well, it resonated with me because indeed I recognize that throughout the day, I don't want the news to be the same. In the morning, I indeed see it for myself that I read quickly the headlines. I don't even click through sometimes, right? So I just read the articles. Is there something that it's really relevant for me at this moment that takes my time? Yes, no. So I just want to get updated. But then in the evening, for example, because I have more time and I have different hobbies, different interests, I do quite a lot of long reading. So actually topics that I'm interested about, I'll deep dive, read very long articles, as you said before. So it really resonated with me, your approach, and because I work in news, I talk to newspaper publishers basically on a daily basis. I indeed see that there is this tendency at looking into one algorithm, and that one algorithm should be doing it all, whereas I would like publishers and also for ourselves at Twipe, like, to start looking at having a different approach, like the one that you suggest, that really identify and start from the need, start from the reader, because the readers are the ones that are owning the experience in the end, right? And then design the product around that. And I really like the approach because it's very easy. As you said, people don't want to get lost into like settling different bars or flagging I'm interested in politics, economics, and so on and so forth. They want something much more immediate. And I think that's the job of newspapers, is to really create products that their readers love and their readers appreciate. And that has to start from analyzing their needs and really understanding them deeply, which I think you've really done greatly in your paper with your workshops, and that's why I also wanted to have this conversation, because indeed it really triggered me, and I hope that from this, because we have an audience of newspaper publishers, it really gets picked up, and hopefully to see it becoming a reality one day.
Absolutely, I hope to see too. Yeah.
All right, thanks. I think we can close it.
Pleasure.